So what really forges a fighter? What turns someone into a person who spends their entire life taking on these huge, powerful institutions? Today, we're digging into the origin story of Daniel P. Brown, and we're going to see how the battles of his childhood literally created the warrior he would become.
This quote right here, it's really the key to his entire story. It's all about survival, about being one of the only ones to get away from a place that just consumed almost everyone else. So the big question is, what exactly was this place he had to escape from? Okay, so our story starts here, New Bedford, Massachusetts, 1948. Daniel P. Brown is born into a lower working-class Irish family. And New Bedford, well, it was one of those classic American mill towns that was just in the middle of this slow, incredibly painful decline. It was hollowing out from the inside.
Yeah, just look at this number, 80,000. It tells you everything you need to know about the sheer devastation. The whole city only had about 120,000 people. So in a single year, 80,000 jobs just vanished. Can you imagine that? The empty factories, the silent streets, that feeling of total hopelessness? That's the world he was born into. And look, this wasn't some abstract economic statistic for him. This was his everyday reality. Most of the kids he ran around with in his neighborhood, they ended up either dead or in jail. That's it. In a world like that, there are very few ways out. But Brown, he saw one door, and he decided he was going to kick it right off its hinges. And that door was education. And here's this really fascinating little detail from his childhood. His father was deaf, and because of that, from a very young age, he had to learn to speak with incredible volume and precision just to be understood. It forged this skill in him, this habit of speaking with such clarity and force. It's wild to think that this same skill would one day serve him just as well in a silent meditation hall as it would in the middle of a high-stakes courtroom battle. So, okay, we've got this determined kid, right? But here's the thing. He wasn't some kind of brilliant student. Not at all. He was pretty much just another face in the crowd. That is, until one person saw something in him that nobody else had. And that one moment, it changed absolutely everything. In 4th grade, a teacher named Mrs. Merchant did something that sounds so simple, but it was absolutely profound. She saw him, She didn't just teach the class, she recognized a potential in him that hadn't even surfaced yet. And her attention, just that simple act of seeing him, unlocked it all. Almost overnight, he went from being an average kid to the best student in the class. And look at how fast things changed for him. By the time he was just 11 years old, he wasn't just the top student. He was actually making his own money working as a sketch artist. And this was so much more than a job. It was the very first time he realized he could build a future with his own 2 hands. Okay, so fast forward a bit. As a teenager, Brown found something that felt like a new kind of faith, a real bedrock of certainty. But it wasn't in a church. For him, science became his religion. It felt like this pure, incorruptible truth in what was otherwise a really messy world. And that was the heart of it for him, Science was all about hard facts, things you could prove. The results didn't care who you knew or which side of the tracks you came from. It was supposed to be a world of pure merit. At least that's what he thought. 3 years. I mean, just think about that for a second. When you're a teenager, 3 years is an absolute eternity. He poured every ounce of his energy into one single science fair project. This wasn't just some homework assignment. To him, at that point, this was his life's work. And then, the crash. The results come in. He wins first prize in his category, biology. But the grand prize, the big one, the trip to the national fair, the money, it somehow goes to the person who came in second place. It made no sense. And it took him 6 months to find out the real reason. It was just plain old corruption. The whole thing was rigged from the start for the student from the local Catholic parish school. And in his own words, you can just feel how heavy that betrayal landed. I mean, this was the first huge disillusionment of his life. He was totally crushed. The one system he believed in, the one thing he thought was pure, turned out to be just as rotten as everything else. But what happens next? This is just incredible. His mother, who is clearly a woman you did not mess with, she summons the bishop to their house. The bishop. She calls him out on the church's hypocrisy, tells them they're done with the church, and then,
In a scene you could not make up, she literally kicks the bishop down the stairs and out of her house. And you have to remember, young Daniel Brown is watching this whole thing unfold. And the lesson from that day was burned into his memory forever. Institutions will protect themselves, no matter what, even if it means throwing an individual under the bus. A seed was planted right then and there that would basically define the rest of his life. So that lesson about powerful institutions, it just simmered with him for years. He ends up going to college, he's the first in his family to do so, and he dives deep into science. But then, in his final year, a totally random course he was required to take completely changes the trajectory of his life. So you know how it is in college, you have to get those required credits out of the way? To satisfy a humanities credit, he signs up for a class on Eastern religions. He basically figured it would be an easy A, kind of soft, maybe a little bit silly. He pretty much took it as a joke. But you have to remember what was going on in the world at this time. This is the height of the Vietnam War. The whole country is in turmoil. And all of a sudden, his work in a science lab, studying these tiny invisible organisms, it just started to feel so disconnected, so remote from the very real, very visible human suffering that was happening everywhere. And then that joke of a class, it gave him this brand new focus. He had this epiphany, the mind. The mind is what generates all this suffering. And if that's true, then maybe, just maybe, it could be trained to transcend it. And just like that, studying the mind felt like the most serious, the most urgent work he could possibly do. So now you can start to see all these different threads, right? You've got the tough upbringing, that deep betrayal by an institution he believed in, and now this sudden turn away from pure science and toward the human mind. They're all starting to weave together to form his life's work. And check out how fast he moved once he had this realization. He graduates in 1971 with a degree in microbiology, and that same year he goes to the University of Chicago and designs his own interdisciplinary program to study psychology, religion, and anthropology. By the very next year, 1972, he's already found his first great teacher, a root lama named Geshe Wangyal. There was zero hesitation. And this is where it all clicks into place. The little boy who watched his mother literally kick a bishop down the stairs for a corrupt act, he grew up to be the man who spent the next 40 years of his life in courtrooms. He became a forensic psychologist, fighting for the very people that the church and other big institutions had decided were expendable. So it really leaves you with a pretty powerful question, doesn't it? How often are our greatest strengths forged not by our wins, but by our deepest, most painful disillusionments? For him, that crushing moment at the science fair wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning. It was the wound that forged the weapon. A life shaped, not in spite of its early hardships, but precisely because of them.